Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I think this is the fifth in the series for these webinars, which we're doing, which have been funded by the Safe Deposit Scotland Charitable Trust. The webinar this week is about how you can track down, use your title deeds to track down your co-owners, if you don't know who they are, and find out what your rights and responsibilities and their rights and responsibilities are. And I've got two guests today. The first one who we're going to hear from is Andy Mosley. And Andy is the Senior Policy Officer at Scottish Empty Homes Partnership. And they've done some very interesting things to try and track down the owners of empty properties. As you can imagine, this is one of the more difficult tracking jobs that you might ever have to do. Then my second guest is Ross Mackay from Coulters. And Coulters is a specialist property agency and legal firm in Edinburgh, and they just deal with residential property law and transactions. And Ross has been convened a number of Scottish Law Society working parties and other groups. He is a conveyancing specialist. And the other thing I'm going to do today is I'm just going to give you a quick demonstration of how you can actually get online to Registers of Scotland and start to find out how you can get hold of your title deeds. It'll be a bit of a blow-by-blow trip. So the usual kind of thing here, the chat is open, as they say, and it would be great if you all just popped in and said hi, where you were from, anything you particularly want to know, any questions you can put in the Q&A. And we'll be going to a Q&A after we have heard from Andy, after you've had a look through the blow-by-blow picking up of your title deeds, and after we've spoken to Ross, who's going to be talking about how you lodge notices and some of the other intricacies of conveyancing that you may have questions about. But we will go to all of your live Q&A, and we will pick up on all questions that you have, and we'll keep going till we've got to the end, as usual. So we'll just be going to that video any second now. But just before we do, there is a handout, and in the handout we've got links to a number of the pages on the Under One Roof website where you can find out more about your title deeds and tracking them down. And we've also got a link to the Scottish Empty Homes Partnership web page, and also to their Facebook page where you can also correspond with them through that. So Petra, are we okay to get going with the video?
The person I have with me now is Andy Mosley, who's the Senior Policy Officer at the Scottish Empty Homes Partnership. Hello, Andy. Andy, what do people do if they have an empty flat in their block? Is there any help they can get?
Yes, there's a lot of help they can get. I mean, the first thing almost would be to say, ask other neighbours in the block, see if they have any information about the owner, a forwarding address, if they know anything about the reasons why the property is empty. Because what you may often find in a tenement is someone's already been through this, the history's already known about it, so ask around from that. After that, if there's a factor in the block, speak to them first, because they should have details of all the owners in the properties that they manage. Individual owners should be updating them on change of addresses, so the factor should also be able to contact the owner from it. And if those don't really give you any information, probably the next thing to think about is to go to Registers of Scotland. You can search that for free, and you can get a copy of the title sheet there, which will give you information about the owner. If it's not on Registers of Scotland, it's possibly Registers of Assassins will still have the details of the owner.
Yes,
so places that you can find out about who the owner of the property is, and different people that you can ask within the property at the moment. And then following that, there is also, of course, the Empty Homes Advice Service and Empty Homes officers, but there's other things to say that you can sort of follow before going through to them.
Yeah, I mean, one of the problems sometimes people have is when they get the deed, you know, they find that there's an address for the owner, but that's often some time back, and that's often the case with empty properties. It's often been sort of lying there for some time before they become problematical, isn't it? Have any of your empty homes officers ever tried anything really novel to try and get hold of of an absentee owner?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways that are done to try and find people. So you can think about from starting point, I suppose, is sometimes where the property's been rented out would be to think about, well, find out, was an agent used to rent it out? Mm-hmm. Contact that agent. Do they know who the landlord was? Have they got a forwarding address for them? Do they have any information they can provide for it? Yeah. There's also things such as if the person's not being seen, missing persons websites have been used for that. Areas such as I've just notified Scottish Police have a missing persons in where you can search for things on there. Also the sites on Facebook, missing persons groups that people have posted things up on. So these are different ways that people have used to try and find out about owners. Also, the equivalent of the kind of air hunters groups have been used as well, that are very good at following leads. So things such as what they can do is look at if they can find the names of the owner. There may be things such as finding out through national insurance records. Is there anything there that's giving addresses for it? Is there any other information? If it was an owner who's got a number of properties, are there any details on company's house? Any other registers there that will give information about it? So there's a variety of different ways of sort of trying to track people down. And then there's the one that sometimes people don't necessarily think, in spite of the fact that we can all spend time sort of finding people that we used to know at school, looking at Facebook, we don't necessarily tend to think about finding people that we've never met on Facebook. But often if you can find the picture of the owner, if you know enough information about the owner, looking on Facebook, we know a couple of examples where people have done that and have actually turned up the details of the person on there. And again, there are a couple of other things also. So mentioned about missing persons. Some of the time where the owners have been absent for a long time, because we're always assuming that, in a sense, that the owner is alive and well and can be found. But in some instances, obviously, the owner might not be alive anymore. So as well as missing persons websites sort of suggesting, has this person been seen? There's also options for checking on registers of birth, marriages and deaths to see if any details are entered in that. And if you can find out from that as well, if the person has died and you have a date of death and a last address, it may also be possible then to go through to Sheriff's Court, find out whether a grant of confirmation's been issued in that estate to see about who would now be the owner of the property, to see whether they've taken title to it. So there's different ways that can be done on this to find an owner. One of the things I'd also sort of mention, which I probably should have said earlier on with it, what do you do if there is an empty flat, is also what we know sometimes from experience with people who've contacted Empty Home Service is sometimes the person people think is the owner of the property isn't the owner of the property. So even if you are told, yeah, this flat was owned by Joe Bloggs, he lived there a few years ago, it's possibly always still worth checking on Registers of Scotland to make sure that that is the person that owned the property, that it wasn't just someone who was renting it out or someone that was living there, perhaps the son or the daughter of the owner or the father, mother of the owner, to make sure that you're looking for the right person rather than perhaps someone who was only ever renting the property and not the owner of it.
But tracking down the owner, I mean, there's some fantastic ideas, it sounds like a whole TV program in trying to track down properties, let alone your ancient relatives in these things. But what do you do when, you've established who the owner is, but you're still in a position where that person cannot pay for the common repairs? Is there sources of help people can get?
If you've tracked the owner down and they're still not willing to pay for the common repairs, it's heading probably into a different territory from empty homes work. But if you're looking at that from an empty property, If the owner can't afford to bring the property back into use, we would advise, if the owner wants to do something with the property, that they contact the Empty Homes Advice Service, or they contact Empty Homes officers in their local area, because the Empty Homes officers and the Advice Service will be able to advise on options to bring the properties back into use. So it may be, for example, where the property's been empty for 2 years or more, there's discounts available on VAT, so VAT discounts available for work, so that can reduce the cost of bringing the property back into use. There's also potentially the options of organisations, housing associations and others that may be looking to expand the portfolio of properties that they've got. So there may be organisations that you can lease the property to as well. So there's schemes for there which can work from that respect. Potentially, again, if the owner is interested in selling the property, whether the other owners are able to put together a package to buy that property off them may be another way. The bigger risks, really, or the bigger issues occur where you've tracked down the owner, you've said to the owner, this property really needs work doing on it, it's causing a problem for every other property in the tenement, and the owner shakes their head and say, well, I'm not going to do anything from this, I don't care about it, I don't live there. Where that is happening, there's potentially proceedings you can take under statutory nuisance provisions, depending on the nature of the issues in the property, what damage it's causing to other properties around there, to sort of try to force the owner to do something about the property. So those are avenues to go down.
Yeah, I mean, we've had previous webinars in this series where we picked up on the issue of enforcing repairs and the kind of help people can get, and the recordings of those webinars are available that people can jump into. But I was intrigued that you're mentioning Empty Homes officers and the Empty Homes project. How do people get in touch with these Empty Homes officers in the project?
If they come through to the Scottish Empty Homes Partnership website, we've got pages on there for the Empty Homes Advice Service, and there's also then a contact page which lists the details of all of the Empty Homes officers. So at the moment, 21 local authorities in Scotland have Empty Homes officers. Other local authorities may have someone that works on empty homes, but not working specifically as an Empty Homes officer. But all of the details for the contacts that we have on each local authority is on the Scottish Empty Homes Partnership website, as well as details with how you can get in touch with the Empty Homes Advice Service. We've also got Scottish Empty Homes Partnership Facebook page now as well, which has a lot of the details, a lot of information, and that also has information sometimes around sort of practical guides, little tips for people as to say, well, what help is available from there. We'll
put a link to that on the handout, Andy, so that people can just download that and get straight to you. That's fantastic. It's also is really interesting you mentioning that people can get that VAT relief if a property's been empty for 2 years. Have you got any other wee tips like that you want to pass on just now for anyone who's listening, just happens to be an owner of an empty property that they're trying to bring back into use?
If you're the owner of an empty property, again, if it's been empty for 10 years, a lot more than if you're looking to buy the empty property. And if the property's been empty for 10 years, actually, then you can get the work done VAT completely free. It's exempt from VAT, which is quite a major saving. Also, if you're buying a property that's in need of major structural renovation or repairs, in many instances, you can then get a 50% discount on the council tax for 6 months from when you purchase it. Within the Empty Homes Partnership as well, there's also a merchant's discount page, which includes various organisations that are offering discounts either on advice, on materials, on other services to owners of empty homes. It can also help you to reduce the cost of bringing the property back into use. If you're trying to bring the property back into use, say to rent it, as mentioned earlier, could contact housing associations to see if they'd be interested in taking the property. If you're looking to potentially sell the property as well, then sometimes if it's there's matchmaker services that are run with some of the empty homes, through some of the empty home services, which can be an alternative way rather than putting the property onto a market. If you're saying, well, yeah, I'm keen to sell this perhaps to someone who's interested in renovating your property, doing your property up, often then the empty homes officers will be able to put you into contact with someone who said, yeah, they're interested in buying that kind of property and can negotiate a reasonable price with you for that work. So there are those elements where you can think of it can become, in a small way, an additional marketplace for the property.
Yes, there might well be some landlords listening who would be willing to be one of those matchmaker partners and have the ability to take on empty properties and bring them round. So that does sound like some very useful tips, both of people who own empty properties and are trying to do with them, and also those who've got an empty property in their tenement and would like to kind of persuade those owners, once they've managed to get in touch with them, that there is help available for them. It's not just something that has to be left as it is. So yeah, no, that's great tips, Andy. Some great tips. It was very interesting that you should mention people going to look in the registers of Scotland to see what they can find, because I have actually been looking at the registers, and I've got a short video we can show people of exactly how they go and get their title deeds. Let's go into that now, and then we can bring in our other guest to talk about some of the ways you can finesse your search and dealing with title deeds.
You may recall this fire that took place in Pollokshields a few months ago. It was actually the second fire in the same street within a period of a few months. And the owners contacted us because they were having a big problem trying to sort out who is responsible for the mutual gable wall. You can see the owner's property here on the left, and the mutual wall was shared with the property on the right, which is the one which had the fire. And we advised that they had to go and find their title deeds in order to be able to work out who is responsible for the reconstruction of that wall. Was it a completely joint responsibility, or was it the responsibility of just one set of owners? So we set them off through to the registers of Scotland to try and find out what they could. Start with your favourite search engine. I'm just using one of the most common ones. And I'm going to go to the registers of Scotland. It's one I've been searching for a bit in researching this, so this will just pop up. And you can see here's their main website. And the service that you want to go to is this one here, ScotList, Scotland's Land Information Service. So just click on that, and you can see here that you can start to find property owners or property price, or buy the property documents such as the title deeds, which are of course now known as land certificates. So here we're going to have a look here for the property information. And I'm just going to put in here the postcode of the property that the owners gave us. And I'm just going to search. And you can see here that it's bringing up a number of properties at this particular address. And the one that I'm looking for is this one here, 137 Kenmure Street. And let's just have a look at the properties here. And you can see here some of the purchases which have taken place. And we can also go and look and find out more about this particular property. So we could look and see where it is on the map, and this might be a way to help you find a particular property that you're looking for. And it's this one here. And if I click on that, you can see again it's coming up with this address here. Let's view all the results. And here we've got a particular flat coming up at 21 Kenmure Street. So let's see what we can find out about that just by clicking on it. So what we're getting here is we're getting the title number, and this might be useful if you're trying to carry out further operations. We've got the address, so the particular flat is 21, and the last purchase price of £150,000 paid on 23rd of December 2015. there's the history of all the prices. There's the flat there. And now we come to the bit where we can see that we can buy the title sheet. So this is £3. This is very cheap to get, a lot of very useful information. And I'm just going to add that to my basket. So here it is coming up, and I'm just going to check out at this point, and it's looking for my credit card. Now, while I'm waiting for that particular title sheet to pop into my inbox, I'm going to have a look at the Register of Landlords to find out if there are any landlords living at that property who we might want to contact. So I am back to my favourite search engine, and oh look, I looked before, Register of Landlords Scotland. So let's just put that in, and up it comes. Very simple. Here is the landlord register, and I can actually go and search that register and find out if there are any landlords of that particular property and who they are. So search the register, and this is actually a function that is maintained by the Registers of Scotland, so it's a very similar kind of interface for users as that we showed earlier. And let's just start now, and it's looking straight away for either the rental property postcode or the landlord registration number. Now in this case we don't know the registration number, but we can find the rental property postcode. So I'm just going to put this in here again. And let's see what we can find there. So here we've got 30 addresses coming up at this particular postcode. And you can see here a list of all of the different properties in this particular street. Now, the one I was told was rented is 11 at 137 Kenmure Street. So if I just click on that there and just prove I'm not a robot, just ticking, I'm sure a robot could do that, and press continue, here I come up with the name of the landlord. So we have the name here. It's a joint ownership, and here are the agents, Martin and Co. So if you needed to get repairs done, needed to contact the landlord, this would be where you would go. In other cases, it might actually give you the landlord's name and address, but in this case, we've got the agent who has registered this. So that's us very quickly found out for absolutely nothing who a landlord is at a particular property. And of course, right, so I've opened up my inbox. It's only been a couple of minutes since I sent off that payment, and here is the email with the information, and I've got two attachments, and if I open those up, we've got the title plan and we've got the title sheet. So if I open up the title plan, here you can see pretty much as we saw before the land boundaries of that property, and that is as it appeared on the map that we looked at previously. And if we click here, we will get the title sheet coming up, and here we can see we have the ownership, we have the map reference, and we have the title sheet number, and we've got the date it was first registered and the date it was updated. And here is the property address, and it tells us here that the subjects are the southernmost house on the second floor of the tenement at 137 Kenmure Street. Now sometimes when you look at these things it will give a flat position. Sometimes that's easier to understand, but obviously the conventions change, so a lot of practices would give this kind of geographical compass direction to identify a particular property. And here you'll find that you've got this rather long screel of information, which we're going to go and have a look at separately. Here we've got the ownership and where the person lived at the time. Here we've got their standard security. This is obviously the mortgage that they got. And here we have the burdens. So this is some of the information about what the property owner is burdened with or required to do. And you can see that this is just a fairly long screed of information. And I find the best thing to do with this is to just copy this out into Word and go through and paste it and give it titles so you can get some kind of navigation from that. And we'll see if this is going to be just copy the ship and where the person lived at the time. Here we've got their standard security. This is obviously the mortgage that they got. And here we have the burdens. So this is some of the information about what the property owner is burdened with or required to do. And you can see that this is just a fairly long screed of information. And I find the best thing to do with this is to just copy this out into Word and go through and paste it and give it titles so you can get some kind of navigation from that. And we'll see if this is going to be helpful to us in trying to find out who has to pay for the repair of that particular mutual wall. The next bit of information that you're able to find for free is about shops and who owns shops, who the tenants are and who the owners are. And for this you need to go to the Scottish Assessor's website. So going back to your favourite search engine, oh, look, I looked before. It's the Scottish Assessors, and in fact it's the valuation role that you're looking for. So let's just go there. And here you come up again with their website, and we can go and have a look at that and find the information that we want about shops. And it comes up on their homepage. It's very easy to see, but you can search for a rateable value or you can search for a council tax band. Now in this case it's shops that we're looking at, so we're going to go to this bit here about rateable values. And so here I have entered the postcode for that property again, G41 2NU. And you can see two properties coming up here, one at 143 Kenmure Street, one at 145 Kenmure Street. And you can see the occupier. And the occupier is the person who's responsible for paying these business rates to Glasgow City Council. And if we click on View More here, we can see here some more information about this property. We've got the address, and we can see that we have the proprietors, who are Nizar and Rosmeen Khan, and you can see we have the tenant, Murs Hamid. So it may be that when you go to deal with common repairs, you will find yourself speaking to the tenant. But it is the owner who is responsible for carrying out repairs. You will need to go and speak to Nizar and Rosmeen Khan about getting repairs carried out. And if they say, look, we have a full repairing lease, it's up to the tenant to carry out repairs, well, it's the owner's responsibility, and it's up to them to recover the cost of repair from their tenants. That's a separate contract which is between the two of them. It doesn't affect the owner's responsibility to carry out common repairs. So these are the people who you're going to want to get hold of if you need to have a common repair carried out.
Hello everyone. I hope you enjoyed all of that. I could see on the chat a number of you really appreciating the comments that Andy was making about how to find empty properties. And I also very much liked John Sear coming in, telling people ways of finding some of your properties when you're presented with the whole list and you don't have your own, you know, the one address that you can find. So have a look on the chat for some very helpful tips from John. So hopefully in a second, we're going to get Ross Mackay coming in, and we're going to pick up on a few issues with Ross, some of the things that you may have tried to do in the past. And I noticed that we have a question here that we are going to put to Ross. I think it's more on kind of repair issues, but I think Ross has got the experience to cope with these things. So I'm very much looking forward to Ross popping in very shortly.
After we finish talking to Ross, we will go back to Andy, because there are some questions there about council tax reductions for properties which have been empty for over 2 years. And that's maybe something which we can pick up on again. And the other point that came in on the chat was someone who said they'd had to pay £25 to get a title deed. Now, I think, and I'm not absolutely certain about this, but I think when you request a title deed from the Register of Saycenes, that does cost a lot more to get hold of, because they effectively have to go and find an old paper copy and photocopy that and get it sent to you. It's virtually the equivalent of that. Scotlis, which I was looking at, is a really big database of properties, and everything is computerized in trying to get things through. And that search cost me £3 to get that one property and the information about it. But I have to say, the difficulty with getting those title deeds is that you just get this long, there's a long screed of writing, and if title deeds weren't hard enough to read as it is, they're even harder when they just come out in this kind of block of text without any kind of headings or paragraphing. So one of the things that we suggest people do is that you just cut and paste that into a Word document, and you then go through and just try and put in paragraph marks where it seems to be appropriate. And that will help you to start to find sort of the various sections that there are in your title deeds. And these often start off with the history, you know, where they're telling owners to do all sorts of things. I say like not boil horses to make glue. You know, all these things are just so appropriate for us today. But once you've got all of these things there, you then need to go through and check to see whether your title deeds are in conflict or whether they're missing anything from the Tenants Scotland Act. So you then need to go and compare with the Tenants Scotland Act. And we have actually got a document which you can download from Under One Roof, which allows you to just cut and paste what your title deeds say against every single thing that the Tenements Act says. And you'll then be able to see where you need to go to the Tenants Scotland Act to pick up on things, or where you need to go to what your own title deeds say. That's something that we can go back to and have a look at if need be. I'm hoping we're going to get Ross. We seem to have some problem in trying to get hold of him there. Andy, I wonder, do you want to come in while we're waiting for Ross and pick up on some of these points that people were putting about the council tax reductions and things like that? We'll see if we can pick Andy up while we're waiting for Ross. We know he's there, you know, so there'll just be some technical problem, a bit like the one we had last week. So thankfully we have Andy. Hello again, Andy.
Hi.
Hi there. It's great you could pop in here, because we had a question from somebody about the council tax bans and that the reduction is available for properties after 2 years. Could you just go back over that again for people and just give them a bit more information, because it does seem to be of interest to people?
Yeah, so with the council tax, the starting position for empty properties is that they receive a discount of council tax, which is normally 50% discount. The discount can get reduced at different points in time. And also then a surcharge gets applied after certain points in time. The starting point is where a property has been empty for a year or more and it's not being actively marketed for sale or rent, then in most instances, councils will normally increase the council tax, apply a levy, which across most local authorities will be double what you're normally paying for council tax. If the property is for sale or let and being actively marketed, then that would normally start from 2 years rather than 1 year. Within that, there are again some other exceptions to the rules, and there's also a discretion. So the way the legislation is set up is that councils actually have a discretion which can be applied on individual cases, whether they apply the levy or not. Also, the point that I mentioned earlier around if you buy a property that's in need of particular structural renovation or repair, there's automatically, if you're the owner of a property in that condition, from the date when it becomes long-term empty, there's a 1-year exemption from council tax, but that's only from the day it originally became long-term empty. If, however, you buy a property that still needs that work, then how the legislation is worded is that the owner is entitled to, the new owner is entitled to a 6-month discount on the council tax. So they should only be paying 50% and certainly shouldn't be paying the levy until that 6 months is up. We're aware sometimes that people have said to us they've had difficulties with claiming that. We can help people to tell them whereabouts in the legislation it is that says that. And the other thing to note as well is, say, there's discretion in any case. So if you have got an empty property, if it's not immediately eligible for a reduction, always set out your arguments to the local authority. Make clear what you're doing to bring the property back into use, what your plans are. If you feel that the application of the levy is going to stop you from bringing it back into use, make those points clear as well. So don't just go asking for a discount, say, I've got this property, please can I have a discount? Always think about what your plans are to bring that property back into use, what you're looking at doing, what the barriers are you're facing at the moment. And if you can make the arguments as to why the imposition of the levy would stop you from bringing that property back into use, perhaps because of the additional money you're paying out, that's money that you would otherwise be paying on repairs to the property, then always do that. Put your case firmly but politely as well, because the thing to remember is that the default position often is that you will be charged the levy. You're asking for discretion. We'd always advise people to make that case politely. It's always the best way to try to get people on your side.
Yes, and as you're pointing out, to think yourself into what the local authority's position is. They do want these houses brought back into use. So just point out to them how you're helping them achieve their own objectives. That was great, Andy. Just hang on in there, will you? We now have Ross, and Ross has some questions building up for you already, actually. So
good.
We'll get you thinking on your feet, but I'm sure that is something you're very used to doing. Just going back to some of the things, looking at stuff from the registers of Scotland, though, are there any particular tips and tricks that you and your team have come up with that help you get through these things?
Probably the first thing to say is that solicitors actually have a different access to Scotland. We have a business user access, which gives you slightly more information. It may well be that if people have a specific issue, they may want to speak to their lawyer. Most family lawyers will be happy to go onto Scotland quickly via the business user side to try and assist clients. We can get it downloaded very quickly and deal with queries. So, for example, for tenement flats, the screen that you see won't say who the owners are. But on the business user side, for example, on that Kenmure Avenue property, we can see all the flats and also see who the owners are up front. Now, you can't do that for a house, but bizarrely, you can do it for tenement properties if they're all registered under the one number. So we can deal with that as well. The thing to bear in mind is that property in Scotland is always owned by someone. Even at the end of the day, it's Her Majesty. It's owned by someone, and you will find a title to it. The Land Register is a big drive on at the moment to complete the registration of all Scottish property by 2024. So the Register of Sazeens that you're referring to will become historic very shortly. But here and now, there are still a number of cases, a fairly substantial number of properties which are still in the Sazeens Register. But again, through Scotland, you can get a copy of the title sheet for that unregistered property. That will tell you the history of the property, and will be able to tell you who the last recorded, as opposed to last registered owner is from that. Some of the attendees have been saying you can then cost £25 to get a copy of the actual title. That's correct. But at least the search sheet for £3.60 via Scotland will tell you what you have to find out. The recorded title, or even the registered title, may not be absolutely up to date. As been touched on, the property might be empty due to death or disability. The party may be in a nursing home. Usually there's someone about looking after the property in some shape or form. But if you are drawing blanks, you can go to the commissary court, as Andy mentioned, because if there is a death, almost certainly someone is looking to register that with the local sheriff court. Again, that's a matter of public record. Now, you can go to the commissary courts and they will give you that information. If you are drawing a blank in that regard, another avenue is the exotically named QLTR, who is the Queen's and Lord's Treasurer in Remembrancer. Now, basically, this official is the person who inherits all property where there is no other living relative. So if you have a situation that a property has become vacant, there's an elderly person, no one knows who the next of kin are, it will end up in the hands of the QLTR, and they then have power to force a sale of the property in effect, should you wish to do so. So there is an avenue there as well. Scotland really should be your first port of call at all times. So it is only £3.60, £3 plus VAT, and you can drill down to the properties to a fairly good level of detail in that respect. If you're at all uncertain, find a friendly lawyer who can interpret it for you. Annie's been talking about the bamboozling verbiage that you do get when you get into Section D, which are the title conditions. And really, for a layperson, in most cases, it's going to be a wasted effort to try and work your way through that. The example Annie picked up was going about things like what are called contracts of ground annual. These were all abolished 40 years ago, and they are really verbiage as much as anything. But the important thing is to find out what's owned in common, where you have a tenemental situation, and what is the obligation for repairs. And that will be there in some shape or form. If you have a repair situation and the title is silent, that's where the Tenement Scotland Act 2004 comes in. That is a default code of obligations and rights and remedies for tenemental owners. And when the Scottish Government brought in a whole swath of land reform legislation back in the early 2000s, the Tenants Act was actually one of the best things they did, because it has simplified and codified a lot of the old-fashioned common law rules that we had in that regard. So that will give you an answer as to who is obliged to do that. So I noticed one of the other comments was in the chat line was about tenement flats not having an identifier flat number. The difficulty there is that the land register can only register what is given to them. So that may well be northmost second floor flat, 123 Acacia Avenue. If that's what the historic title shows, that's what the land register is legally obliged to put onto the register. The numbering system, flats 1, 2, 3, 4, is relatively modern and is something that is used as an administrative basis by local authorities in particular. It's not actually got any legal standing. Your legal description will be northmost second floor flat, and the number of flat 2/2 is something that the council may have allocated, or indeed the co-owners may have allocated amongst themselves. And you get the situation whereby a flat can have effectively 3 designations at least, which is northmost second floor flat, flat 2/2, or you would have something like flat 2F1, which is, for example, it's used more in Edinburgh to describe the locale of a particular flat. So it's not easy trying to break that down, where You have 10 flats in a tenement, and you have a variety of descriptions like that. But with a bit of research, you can work that out and find out what is there. There is a drive, as well as extending the land register, to have a UPRN, unique property reference number, for each property in Scotland. It's been talked about ever since Scotland was introduced. And the techies behind the scene at the land register are keen to bring in something like this, so that every flat eventually, every property, will have a unique identifier code. So it'll be much more easy to identify properties once and for all. So rather than having 10 flats under 123 Acacia Avenue, it's going to be code ABC 124. And that will be a great assistance in the future. Here and now, we don't have that.
Yeah, no, there's been some great strides forward with the register over the past few years, haven't there, Ross?
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Scotland, the original concept behind Scotland, which I was involved in, is not just the title sheet, the title information. What is currently Scotland is no more than what used to be called Registers Direct, which is an online access service to title sheets. The concept behind Scotland is to allow one portal to provide information about the assessor's office, about landlord registration, about local authority statute notices, about anything that you would like. And the idea is that basically there is a single portal for all Scottish citizens to get information about property. Part of the trouble has been, apart from cost and resources, is that the wish list of people grows exponentially. Well, when we were looking at Scotland initially, for example, we had RSPB quite keen that nesting or bird nesting sites are added to Scotland, which is fine, but there's a limit to what can be done realistically. The example that we
confess, Ross, that I've been one of those people trying to add to that list of things that that the registers would keep through the Scottish Parliamentary Working Group. Sometime in the future, when people have surveys carried out, that some of the information in there can be carried forward to the registers to give people a lot more information about the property when they purchase. But I can see from what you're saying that could take some time.
Yeah. The example we have is Norway. Norway has something equivalent to Scotland, but it is much more developed. And if you go on to the Norwegian version of Scotland, should you speak Norwegian, you'll get a host more information. You'll get the line of pipes, water pipes, access roads, drains, all that is available at the click of a few buttons. And that's the ambition that we have in Scotland, is to try and get something more like that. But here and now, when you have empty flats, I'm afraid we are stuck with reservations and commissary courts and things like that.
And the air hunters as well, yes.
Yeah.
You were making a comment, Ross, about the difficulty in reading title deeds. We do have a number of owners who are very determined DIYers in almost everything, and we do encourage people to get expert help. But one of the things that people have come to us saying they would like to be able to do themselves is to serve notices, like the notice of potential liability. And I mean, for those who are here listening in, the notice of potential liability is one of these notices that you can serve, and it gets registered with a title deed, and it tells anyone who comes to buy a property that in effect there are repairs going on, and that someone is going to have a liability to pay for those repairs, and it transfers the responsibility for those repairs to the purchaser. And people would like to be able to lodge that themselves, and the notice looks really simple. But I've had people who are very competent at doing all these things tell me that they've been advised that they should get a lawyer doing it. What do you think about that, Ross? Is it something people could do themselves? Okay,
first of all, I'm getting a message here. Some people might not be hearing me. It might be the line here where I am at home. Hopefully some people...
I have got you okay, Ross, and we are recording, so people do come back to recording. Yeah.
Okay. The Tenants Act provides for this notice of potential liability, and it is relatively straightforward. Property factors use it regularly all the time. It is designed not to be used by lawyers wherever possible. And the level of detail is relatively straightforward, certainly for a registered title. It really involves the registered title, the name of the owner, the nature of the repairs that you wish that errant owner to be responsible for. And effectively, that's it. It then requires to be lodged in the land register or against that property. The cost of that would be £70, but it is relatively straightforward. And the land register themselves are very helpful. You know, if you want to do this yourself, contact their help desk, and they will try and talk you through the process. But the notice is 2/3 of a page, or half a page. It is not difficult, and it should be done. What the notice represents, though, is the end stage of our process. So if you have common repairs in a tenement that you require done, someone is either unable or unwilling to go along with that, but the other owners are willing in the short term to pay for the cost. It simply requires due notice of a stair meeting, due presentation of a tender bid, which the majority wish to accept, an appropriate majority vote, which is then recorded in black and white in writing. If that takes place, the notice can then be lodged against that title. What that means is that any person buying that property that will see that notice and will immediately or should be taking steps to make sure via their lawyer that that repair is met, because what the law provides, if you buy a property with that notice still on it, you, the incoming purchaser, become responsible for that repair cost. So it's due warning to a buyer, and obviously most buyers will be unwilling to take that on. So it's flushed out and dealt with at that sale purchase stage. But to get it on in the first place is not difficult. Information is available online, and the question is pulling down the style from the government website, Schedule 2 of the Tenants Act, and fill it in.
It's on the website as well, actually.
We've
there for people. Yep.
Yeah. I see there's a comment here on the line that some of his solicitors charged £300 for submitting it. That is what a lawyer will charge you, probably, for opening the file and dealing with it. Mm. But that, I suspect, is one item that could be done as DIY quite happily.
Yeah.
As I say, there will be a £70 charge to the land register for registering it, which is the minimum charge for any deed in Scotland. But preparing it yourself is quite feasible. It's not scary in the slightest.
Fantastic. Yeah, one of the other queries I was going to put to you is about changing your title deeds. I mean, we can see a couple of things coming up here. People who are saying, well, look, we've got situations where the deeds are kind of at variance with each other. We've got people talking about rateable values and deeds being apportioned by rateable value. I mean, rateable values went out in 1914, didn't they?
Well, rateable values were frozen in 1989.
Yeah.
And the last valuation, I think, was 1985, but don't hold me to that. Yeah. But various titles still refer to rateable values. And it is those historic values from 30 years ago that you have to look at. The basic principle is that title deeds still rule. So if you are in a block of flats, 8 properties, and they all say common repairs according to rateable value, that in principle is what you have to work with. Now, increasingly, people recognise rateable values are historic as the old fugitives that used to be payable from each property. And you will see the fugity allocation on anything pre-Second World War, almost certainly. But rateable values are becoming equally archaic. But in principle, that's what you use. And you can get that detail from the assessor's office. Certainly in Edinburgh, if we have that situation, you pay £30 to the Lothian assessor, and they will give you a letter itemising the rateable value for every building in a block.
Yeah.
And then you have to work out the mathematics after that. Yeah. But increasingly, people would look to rely on a simple equal share basis as being much simpler and much more straightforward.
Yeah.
If you are a historic tenement where the title deeds are archaic, they're Victorian or even earlier, the Tenants Act provides for a scheme of maintenance. And that effectively is what you can happily rely upon. That says you're liable for the roof repair, you're liable for the common stair repair. The share will be equal, though there is an option that you can use floor area as a basis, which is I've never seen used yet because it's quite technical. But equal shares are what applies. If you are in, say, a more modern flat where the conditions were created perhaps 30 years ago, and you feel that they are now no longer entirely up to date and you wish to see them changed, that can be done, but it can be a tricky exercise, particularly depending on the number of properties that are affected. It would make sense if they could be done with 100% unanimity, because then it makes the process more straightforward. But I did have to do that myself for block of sheltered housing some years ago, where there was unanimity, but the process was time consuming because there was a mixture of registered titles, unregistered, and trying to get all the technical descriptions put together was time consuming, and it did cost the client several £1,000s to get the whole thing done. If you don't have unanimity, there is still a procedure within the legislation, the Title Conditions Act 2003, whereby a majority vote can determine changes. But the procedure is quite cumbersome. There's notices having to be served on all the other flats in the stair on a technical basis, and it can be very clunky, and it therefore becomes quite expensive. The other thing you can't do, you've got to be very careful, you can't then suddenly start imposing unfair charges on co-owners. So if one person is liable for, say, according to rateable value, a share equivalent to 3%, say, you can't suddenly come along and say, aha, you're now going to be liable for 8% or whatever. So it is tricky.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would also mention relying on rateable values can also be difficult if there's been any alterations to the properties. There was a case before the Lands Tribunal a few years ago involving Edinburgh property, which had been converted from a shop into a flat. And the tribunal held that relying on the rateable value was no longer appropriate because it changed the whole nature of the property. So they scrubbed the entire rateable value basis, and then the Tenants Act kicked in. So yes, you can change titles, but it's not easy.
Yeah. I thought that particular case, I recall looking at that, and some of the rationale that the Land Tribunal employed when they actually looked at whether any compensation should be paid was that, look, everybody's much better off having something that's clear, that works, that enables you to get your property maintained. This is beneficial to everybody. There is no compensation that should be paid to the person who's been asked to pay just that small bit more, which I thought was a very enlightened kind of approach to take to it. And I think the problem with the rateable values is it does tend to penalise shop owners, particularly in older tenements. These are in older high streets. These shops aren't the money mines that they used to be, and I think it is fairer if people are paying everything equally or by floor area, whichever. And I think it's just difficult for owners where they do want to kind of make that change and make it permanent, something that will last between different owners. But of course, they can just agree to a change between themselves, can't they? And that will just last the duration of that particular repair and that particular generation of owners, won't it? Yeah,
I mean, that's correct. Rateable values are historic now. If nothing else, for example, if you install central heating, your rateable value would have been, altered. And, over 30, 35 years, properties have changed dramatically. So, yes, there are good grounds for shop owners refusing to pay based on rateable values. And the thing that has to be borne in mind is that if you're relying on the titles, yes, they may say rateable values, but almost certainly rateable values the titles will require unanimous consent. for the repairs being carried out. And therefore, if the shop owner digs their heels in, you may find that actually you have to fall back on the equal share basis anyway.
Yeah.
There has to be a degree of compromise amongst co-owners at all times, rather than relying on the legislation to take that forward.
Yeah. It's the big picture that counts with these things. I think sometimes we tend to go down and say, look, I'm due to pay exactly this, and that's what I'm going for. But getting everybody together and acting together and somebody giving leadership to the process is actually far more important in getting things done for everybody in the long term, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's the big picture. I mean, we are talking about who owns a property, but the big picture is getting co-owners to be responsible for maintaining their co-owned building. But that, as you know, Annie, is a whole different issue entirely, which is one which the Scottish Government is looking at, obviously.
Yeah. We've got a couple of detailed questions here. There's one here. Anne is asking if there's any advice available on how to deal with situations where title deeds for owners in a building differ in terms of responsibility for common repair. I've got an answer to that. What's yours, Ross?
The answer is that if the titles don't cover a common repair or a common part 100%, the titles fall. So if you have a situation whereby, let's say, 8 flats in the stair, 7 flats say it's a 1/8 share, but the 8th flat says it's a 10th share, or it's rateable value, or something else, as a result of which you can't cover 100% of costs, all the titles fall. And your default position, once again, is the Tenants Act.
Yep.
So the titles have to be absolutely clear and 100% to apply to a tenemental repair. You almost hope that there are gaps, because the Tenant Act is much clearer, much fairer, and is easier to determine the position rather than allowing Victorian deeds. But strictly speaking, it's 100% or nothing.
Yeah, great. I think that's what we say on the website as well. So I'm just always glad when someone who knows far more than I do about these things confirms that we're correct. We've got another question here. Someone who says they're struggling to have an owner pay his share of the communal garden maintenance for the last 3 years. He's hand-delivered invoices to his flat, tried to speak to him directly, no avail. And the title deeds have said the project had joint responsibility for the garden. So he then sent a signed for letter to the address on the deeds. Haven't had any response yet. What's their next option?
Garden areas are difficult. If we're looking at a traditional Victorian tenement with a drying green to the rear, the most the titles will probably say is there's an obligation to maintain the drying green. Now, how do you maintain a drying green? Does that mean cutting the grass every month, every quarter? It's unfortunately very vague. Equally, if it is a common part like that, with simply an obligation of maintenance, the errant owner is entitled to say, I'm not responsible for that because there is not unanimous consent. The notice of potential liability don't encompass rear drying areas, nor does the Tenants Act. It covers it in terms of ownership, but not in terms of actual maintenance, short of it actually falling down a mining shaft. If we're simply looking at standard maintenance, cutting the grass, keeping it clean and tidy, unfortunately, that has to be a unanimous or voluntary arrangement. It's very difficult to enforce that against a co-owner. If nothing else, the costs involved of enforcing would be greatly outweigh the actual cost of cutting the grass. It's one of these situations, I'm afraid, where it is sledgehammer to crack a nut in terms of the legislation. And it may be that it simply has to be gentle persuasion of some sort with that party.
Yeah.
But it is difficult. If you're in a modern estate, the whole issue is different entirely, because that will be a factored arrangement. And it would be much more detailed in terms of obligations than a Victorian tenement will have.
Yes, I'm getting to call some of these things the talking cure. You just need to go and keep talking to your owners, your co-owners, and just try and get them to see reason and to come on board with things. And often that is going to be far more effective in the long term than having to take court action. Although sometimes people just do have to go down that route, sadly. Just just scrolling up here, a couple more quickie questions. Is rental value the same as rateable value?
For the purposes of this exercise, yes, it is. You'll often see old title deeds referring to rentals or rental values. That is the same as rateable value, yes.
Right, yes, thank you. RV, it's rateable or rental, that's great. Now, Douglas has come to us. I know Douglas has been having a particular problem, and I've spoken to him before about this, but maybe you'd like to come in on what you think here, Ross. But he's got a property where there are what used to be 3 shops at the bottom, which have now all been converted into one. And the repairs are currently by rateable value. They've got a tenant who's got the full repairing lease. They have previously agreed that they would carry out repairs on a shared basis, so everyone paying 1/6. But he's not particularly happy about this, and he's now got the cafe and shop owner popping in saying, well, look, you know, you agreed you would carry out a survey with the tenant, you're at the shop. You're now coming to me as the owner and saying, I've got to pay for this. What's your view? You must have come across these situations before, Ross.
Yes, I mean, you made the point before that there's 2 aspects to this. One is the contract or lease between the tenant and landlord. And if that is a full repairing lease, that will provide that the tenant has to meet the landlord's share of common repair liabilities for the building. That's a matter or a contract between the landlord and tenant. As far as co-owners are concerned, it's the landlord or owner is the one that they have to deal with for the purposes of repairs. And there you come back to, what do the titles say? If the titles are all clear and are all rateable values, they can be enforced against the ground floor shop. If the titles are vague or indeterminate, it would be 1 share per unit. Now, this is where things get tricky with the Tenants Act, because it refers to 1 share per unit. Now, if you have got what were 3 units combined into 1, my recollection is that then dilutes the obligation into simply 1 unit. So instead of being, 5 flats in 3 shops, it becomes 5 flats in 1 shop. So everyone's share does go up, which can be unfair in that scenario. I would want to double check that particular point, but the Tenants Act is quite clear. It refers to individual units at the point of repair.
And this might be one where the floor area would be a fairer way of dealing with it if the shop is taking up the whole of a floor and the other.
Absolutely. A lot of people forget that there is this alternative within the tenements legislation. It's either equal share, or it's the formula is, or floor area where the larger unit is more than 1.5 times the size of the smaller. So in this scenario where you've got a large shop on the ground floor, it's definitely more than 1.5 times the size of the flats, I would imagine. And therefore that would be the opportunity to use that formula. The difficulty in that regard, though, is determining the floor area, because that's a matter for surveyors. And that would require access to every property to determine floor area. So it's easily said, but actually getting that might be tricky, getting that exact number so you can work out the formula.
Yeah, particularly if you're in a contentious situation and people are unwilling to offer help to each other. Get back to talking, Look, I think we have got through all the questions that we've got, and everything seems to have been answered really ably. Just having a quick look, see whether anybody else would like to say anything or come back. But I found that's been really helpful and interesting. I really liked all of the innovative ways that you both came up with for finding co-owners. You know, the air hunters and the QLTR. You know, these things that really do date back, but which we still use despite all the efforts of the Scottish Parliament to modernise the land holding system in Scotland. We still have these remnants, don't we?
Yeah. Changes are coming. And certainly if you have a large Highland estate, there's changes coming rapidly, and one of the changes there is that you must name a responsible person for dealing with repairs and maintenance of your estate. Unfortunately, they're not drilling that down into flats in Pollokshields or Bruntsfield or anywhere else.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, the day, if I have my way, that will come. Andy, I would just like to thank you particularly for coming in and taking part in things. Is there any sort of further concluding message you would like to give to people?
Not necessarily a concluding message, but just looking through the Q&As, there was one thing which I've sent to reply back to Anne. I think there might have been some confusion over the VAT reductions and what applies. There are VAT reductions where VAT is reduced down to 5% if the property's been empty for 2 or more years and the work's being carried out by a contractor. Then there's different exemption from VAT that can apply where the property's been empty for 10 years and also you're going to be living in that property yourself. If Anne or anyone else would like to contact me via Scottish Empty Homes Partnership website, we produced 2 leaflets that kind of distill all of this information down as best as we can do from what's in the legislation, and we'd be happy to share those with you.
Great. Great. That, you know, there are always people who've got an answer to a question and trying to deal with it. It would just be great if we didn't have to pay VAT on repairs at all, wouldn't it? You know, it seems to me such an essential thing. Why are we paying VAT on it when we're trying to bring up our housing stock and make it all more energy efficient? And it's totally inequitable with new buildings that don't pay any VAT. But that's not my hobby horses, and I should get off them. And just thank everybody for taking part. All of you out there for listening to us, for putting comments on chat, for helping us out with answering people's questions, for asking questions as well. You help make these webinars. This thank you is for you as well as it is for Andy and for Ross, who have just dealt with everything very ably. I'm so glad to have had you in this webinar. So I'd just like to say thank you very much, everybody. If you've got further questions, just pop them to us and we'll see what we can do to try and help you there. Thanks again, everybody. And I'm just going to end this webinar there. Good night, everyone. And look out for next week's webinar as well, when we're talking about factoring and common insurance, another of those big issues that everyone has questions on. Send us your questions now and we'll put them to some very able people to answer those. So thanks again, everybody, and good night.